Yes, I've got a lot of updates for you on the story out of the Bahamas. An American woman is missing. Her husband is being detained after telling the Royal Bahamian Police that she just fell overboard. And then I drifted for 9 hours and then called the police. And there's a whole lot more to it.
April 4th, 2026, 7:30 in the evening. A couple finishes dinner at a waterfront restaurant on Elbow Cay, a small, picture-perfect island in the Bahamas, famous for its red and white striped lighthouse, its protected harbor, and the kind of quiet beauty that draws sailors from all over the world to drop anchor and stay a while. The couple settles up, steps out into the warm evening air, and makes their way down to the water's edge. Their 55-foot sailboat, named the Soulmate, is anchored nearby. To get back to it, they climb into a small 8-foot electric dinghy, a boat they have used dozens of times, on dozens of nights just like this one. 7:30 p.m., they push off. They head out across the dark water. By 4 o'clock the following morning, the husband arrives at a boatyard in Marsh Harbor. He is alone. His wife, Lynette Hooker, is gone. Between those two timestamps, 7:30 p.m. and 4 a.m., is a gap of 8.5 hours. Call it 9. 9 hours. And the story Brian Hooker tells about what happened during those 9 hours contains a series of details that investigators, forensic analysts, and Lynette's own daughter cannot make add up. Physics problems, mechanical inconsistencies, a critical piece of equipment that does not behave the way the account requires, a 6-hour discrepancy between when the boat should have arrived and when it actually did, a documented prior threat, a documented financial motive, and an AIS tracking system that recorded the vessel's position throughout every one of those 9 hours. Data that has been reviewed by the U.S. Coast Guard and that formed part of the probable cause basis for Brian Hooker's arrest. This is the case of Lynette Hooker, a case that is still unfolding as of this recording, a woman who has not been found, and a 9-hour gap that may hold the answer to what happened to her. Welcome to True Crime Vault. Before we dive deep into this investigation, please take a second right now to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Every week we unlock a new case, the stories that deserve to be remembered, examined, and understood. If you care about what happened to Lynette Hooker, hit that like button and share this video. It helps this story reach more people, and right now, that matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. By the end of this video, I want to know, do you think the 9-hour gap is the key to this entire case? Let me know what you think. Now let's go back to the beginning, not to the night of April 4th, further back than that. Lynette Hooker was not the kind of person who faded into the background. In video after video that she posted to her social media accounts, on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok under the name The Sailing Hookers, she radiates a kind of restless, joyful energy that is hard to fake. Wind in her hair, sun on her face, the ocean somewhere in every frame, always. Her posts read like documentation of a life she had chosen deliberately, consciously, against the grain. A life untethered from commutes and mortgages and office buildings, lived instead on the open water, chasing the next horizon. She was in her mid-50s, a mother, a former AT&T employee, a woman who had built a conventional life on land, a house, a career, a retirement plan, and who had given most of it up to sail. The decision to walk away from that life and choose the ocean was not made lightly. It took years of planning and saving and searching. She and Brian had spent time driving across the country looking for the right boat. They found it in Rockport, Texas. She described it in one of their early videos as a little rough around the edges. The decks needed work, but she said, "We knew we were up for the task." There is footage of them working on that boat together, scraping, priming, painting, rebuilding. Two people in the middle of a project that was also a bet on their future. At the end of one of those videos, a message appears on screen. The decks are done. We're still married. Party time. It is a warm, funny line, the kind of small moment that makes strangers on the internet feel like they know you. And many people did feel like they knew Lynette and Brian because she documented everything. The morning coffees in the cockpit, the solar oven experiments, cinnamon rolls, muffins, pizza made on a boat with no traditional kitchen. The dinghy runs to shore for groceries. The thunderstorms rolling in. The sea turtles gliding across the ocean floor below their snorkeling masks. By 2023, they were officially underway. The Gulf crossing video, filmed as the Soulmate slipped out of Kima, Texas, into the fog and open water of the Gulf of Mexico captures the feeling of it. Lynette stands on deck smiling into the camera. "We're finally leaving Kima," she says. "It's only been 4 months." Brian works the rigging behind her. He looks up at her and says, "Hi, sexy." She laughs. Louisiana, Florida, the Bahamas. The months unfolded into a life. The Instagram comments were full of people who had been following along, checking in from life on land, asking questions about the boat and the cooking and the weather and the next destination. And almost always, just within reach of the frame, was Brian. He is present in her videos the way a permanent fixture is present, woven into the background, occasionally looking up, occasionally stepping forward to smile or joke or fix something. She called him her hubby. She filmed him in soft morning light. She overlaid a romantic song over footage of herself snorkeling and wrote a caption that, reading it now, carries a weight she could not have intended. The song played behind the images of her moving through the water. I couldn't help but fall in love again. From the outside, it looked like a love story, the kind that makes people in cubicles scroll through the posts on their lunch breaks and wonder if they could do it too. But there were things the camera did not show, and the people closest to Lynette knew what was underneath the footage. Carly Aylesworth is Lynette's daughter. Since her mother's disappearance, she has spoken publicly and repeatedly, to CNN, to News Nation, to NBC, to the U.S. Coast Guard, about what she knows. And what she describes is a relationship that has a current of darkness running beneath the documented joy. The relationship was volatile at times, she has said, particularly when alcohol was involved. There were periods of conflict. There was a 2015 incident in Kentwood, Michigan, where police were called to a disturbance involving both Brian and Lynette. According to the police report, both parties had been drinking. Brian was found with a bloody nose and told officers Lynette had struck him. Lynette told officers she had been struck by Brian as well, though no visible injuries were documented on her. A prosecutor reviewed the case and declined to pursue charges, finding insufficient evidence to determine who had initiated the assault. The case was dismissed. Both parties alleged harm. Neither was charged. The picture that emerges from that report is of a night that escalated beyond what either of them wanted to admit, between two people who had a complicated and sometimes combustible dynamic. But Carly is talking about something more specific than a 2015 incident that went nowhere in the court system. She is talking about something that happened closer to now. She says that the last time her mother and Brian were together before this voyage, he choked her. She says he made a specific threat. He told Lynette he was going to kill her, and he told her how he was going to do it. He said he would throw her overboard. 2 years before Lynette Hooker disappeared by going overboard from a small boat in the Bahamas at night, the man now the subject of a criminal investigation told her, in a specific, explicit, location-based statement, exactly how she would die. That kind of threat is not just a detail in the background. That kind of threat is what lethality assessment frameworks in the field of intimate partner violence are built to identify. Forensic specialists and researchers in this field are consistent. Prior strangulation and specific location-based death threats are among the most powerful predictors of lethal outcome in a domestic relationship. Not because they are always followed by violence, but because when violence does occur, the presence of that prior threat moves the probability distribution dramatically. A forensic nurse expert interviewed by News Nation in the coverage of this case addressed it directly, noting that prior strangulation and allegations of abuse are especially significant because those are known lethality indicators. Carly put it plainly when she spoke about this. She said, "The fact that this is happening 2 years later is a little bit like, how can we not be suspicious when you've already said that this was going to happen?" How do you answer that? Let's turn now to the night itself, because the most important thing to understand is that this is not a case where the evidence is hidden or missing. The evidence exists. It is specific, time-stamped, and in the hands of investigators. What remains is the question of what it shows, and whether the account Brian Hooker gave police holds up against it. The confirmed facts, as established in official statements from the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and confirmed by multiple reporting outlets, are these. On the evening of April 4, 2026, Brian and Lynette Hooker left a restaurant in the Hopetown area of Elbow Cay at approximately 7:30 p.m. They were heading back to the Soulmate via the dinghy. Brian's account to police: Lynette fell overboard. Conditions had turned windy. Seas were choppy. When she fell, she had the boat's kill switch device, which caused the electric motor to shut off. He says he last saw her swimming toward shore. Strong currents carried her away. He lost sight of her. Without power, he paddled and drifted until the dinghy eventually washed toward shore. He made his way through brush to a boatyard in Marsh Harbor. He contacted police. Emergency services were notified at approximately 5:12 in the morning. That is the account. Now let's examine what the account requires to be true and where the account runs into problems. The first problem is the bounce. Brian told police that Lynette was bounced out of the dinghy. That is the specific mechanism he described. Wave action combined with the movement of the boat causing her to be propelled over the side. Carly Aylesworth has been in that dinghy. She knows that engine. She knows how that boat moves on the water. And when this mechanism was discussed with her, she was unambiguous. The engine goes only a couple knots, she said. It is slow. Going over a wake in it feels like a cork, rising and falling, not launching forward. The boat does not produce the kind of momentum that bouncing over the side would require. She said directly, "You'd go like that. You wouldn't go bing, a big spang, because it doesn't get a lot of speed." And she said she had never once seen anyone bounce out of that dinghy in all the years she had been on it. 2 to 3 miles per hour. That is a leisurely walking pace. That is the speed of someone pushing a cart through a parking lot. The forward momentum at that speed is not nothing, but it is far below the threshold that would cause an adult passenger to be ejected from the side of a small vessel simply because the water was choppy. The second problem is the kill switch. Brian told police that when Lynette went overboard, she had the key, which in this case was the kill switch device that cuts power to the electric motor. In traditional gasoline outboard motors, the kill switch is often a wrist cord lanyard designed to be worn by the operator so that if they fall off, the cord pulls free and the engine stops. But the Hooker's electric motor does not have that kind of device. Carly described it specifically. It is a small plug on a little string. It just clicks in, she said. Almost like a jet ski, but you just click it in with a string dangling from it. She had never seen anyone wrap it around their wrist. So the account requires Lynette, who was a passenger, not operating the motor, to have either been holding this small plug device at the moment she went overboard, or to have grabbed it as she fell into the water. Carly's response to this was plain. "I don't understand how someone could grab onto it when they're in the middle of falling." She is not raising this as a legal challenge. She is raising it as a daughter who cannot make sense of the mechanics of what supposedly happened. The device was not worn by the passenger. It was not designed to be grabbed during a fall, and yet the account requires exactly that. The third problem is the anchor. The dinghy had an anchor. Carly confirmed this. If Lynette fell into the water and was swimming toward shore, alive, conscious, moving, the most logical response for someone in that vessel would be to drop anchor, stop the dinghy from drifting, and either enter the water to reach her or maintain visual contact while calling for help. Brian Hooker is a former Marine. He is, by all accounts, a strong swimmer. He was in a small boat in conditions his daughter described as not roaring seas, with the woman he had spent more than 20 years with in the water nearby. He did not drop anchor. He did not enter the water. He paddled, he says, in a different direction, eventually losing sight of her. Carly put the question directly. Why wouldn't he drop anchor and look for her? Why did he paddle the other way? His attorney has offered the framing that conditions were dangerous and deteriorating, and that panic can lead to poor decisions, that a drowning emergency at night, in choppy water with a disabled engine, is not the same as a calm analysis problem. These are fair points, and they should be considered. But the failure to deploy the anchor, a piece of equipment specifically designed for exactly this kind of situation, is a gap in the account that has not been explained. Now for the most important problem, the one that may prove to be the defining analytical question of this entire case. The 9 hours. Let's do this carefully because the math is what matters here. The electric motor on the dinghy has a confirmed maximum speed of 2 to 3 knots. 1 knot is approximately 1.15 miles per hour. So 2 to 3 knots is roughly 2 to 3.5 miles per hour. Slow. Carly confirmed this directly. It goes only a couple knots, she said. The direct water distance from the Elbow Cay area to Marsh Harbor, the journey Brian Hooker made that night, is approximately 4 to 6 nautical miles, depending on the specific route taken. At the confirmed maximum speed of 2 to 3 knots, A powered dinghy covers 4 to 6 nautical miles in roughly 2 to 3 hours. That is under power, moving at maximum speed. Brian says the engine stopped when Lynette went overboard. He paddled and drifted. So what is the expected travel time for an unpowered vessel drifting in the conditions described? According to Carly, the tidal current that night was approximately 3 knots. The winds were approximately 20 miles per hour. She specifically described it as not roaring seas, not a storm, challenging conditions, but not catastrophic ones. A 3-knot tidal current moving in a direction favorable to Marsh Harbor would carry an unpowered vessel 4 to 5 nautical miles in approximately 90 minutes to 2 hours. Under power, 2 to 3 hours. Drifting with favorable current, 90 minutes to 2 hours. In the most generous interpretation of difficult and variable conditions, where winds shifted and the path was non-linear and the dinghy spent time going the wrong way, perhaps 4 to 5 hours at the outside. Brian Hooker's account requires 9 hours. The gap between the physics of that journey and the duration of the account is approximately 6 hours. 6 hours that the account does not explain. 6 hours that are not accounted for by paddling speed, drift physics, wind conditions, or the direct distance from departure to arrival. That is the 9-hour problem. And it is not a small discrepancy. It is not a rounding error. It is a gap so significant that when investigators and analysts examine it against the known data, the vessel's maximum speed, the tidal conditions, the distance, it does not resolve without introducing a third variable, time spent somewhere, doing something that is not part of the account. And there is a system that recorded every minute of those 9 hours. AIS stands for Automatic Identification System. It is a transponder-based maritime tracking technology used by vessels to broadcast their position, speed, and course at regular intervals. Recreational sailboats of the size the Hookers sailed on, 55-foot keelboats, typically carry AIS transponders as standard equipment. Brian Hooker also had access to AIS tracking data on his phone. After Lynette's disappearance, Carly Aylesworth had someone access the AIS data for the vessel. What she described seeing is specific. The boat appeared to be in the Elbow Cay area in the early evening, consistent with the restaurant visit and the departure time. Then, later that night, it moved up the coast. She could see the trajectory, she could see the distance traveled. But then she said something that sits at the absolute center of this investigation. She said, "I don't really know what happened between 7:30 and the time he went up the coast." Read that carefully. She saw the data. She saw the vessel's position at Elbow Cay in the evening. She saw it moving up the coast later that night. But the specific activities within the 9 hours, what the vessel was doing, where it was, whether it was moving or stationary, what route it took, she could not fully account for. AIS systems log position at regular intervals. The full AIS record for that vessel on the night of April 4th contains entries for every tracked position between 7:30 p.m. and 4 a.m. Those entries show one of 3 things: continuous movement consistent with drifting or paddling, stationary periods consistent with an anchored or stopped vessel, or some combination of both. Whatever the log shows, it is a specific time-stamped record of where that boat was during every one of those 9 hours. Carly shared that data with the U.S. Coast Guard. The Coast Guard's Detroit sector spent 2 hours interviewing Carly about the case. The Coast Guard has opened a separate criminal investigation running parallel to the Bahamas police investigation. Whatever the AIS log shows, it is in the hands of federal investigators who are actively building a case. Brian Hooker was arrested on April 8th, 4 days after Lynette disappeared, by the Royal Bahamas Police Force. He was taken into custody based on what authorities described as probable cause. He was not charged at the time of most recent reporting. His attorney has stated clearly that he denies any wrongdoing and has been cooperating with authorities. His attorney also said his client appeared completely heartbroken and deeply distressed, describing him as in an extremely fragile state following the disappearance and his detention. But the arrest on probable cause tells us something important. It means that by April 8th, the investigation had moved from treating this as an accidental drowning to treating it as a potential crime. That shift does not happen without something. It does not happen based on suspicion alone. It happens when investigators find evidence, physical evidence from the vessel, witness statements from people at the restaurant, meteorological data about the night's conditions, AIS tracking data, examination of communication records, that creates a credible basis for believing a crime may have been committed. What that specific finding was has not been publicly disclosed, but the probable cause did not come from nowhere. It came from something in the record of those 9 hours. Let's talk about the financial picture, because in any investigation involving an intimate partner death or disappearance, the question of financial motive is one that investigators examine carefully. Not because money is always a motive, but because it often is. In 2022, Lynette Hooker sent a message to a friend. In it, she described seriously considering leaving Brian. She talked about packing her belongings and going to Florida, and then she wrote something that reveals the specific nature of the trap she felt herself in. She wrote, "I gave up everything I worked for." Think about what that means in practical terms. The Soulmate was their home. They had sold or given up most of their possessions. Their previous life on land, the house, the stability, the familiar structure of a conventional existence, was gone. The sailing life was both the dream they had built together and the structure that made leaving almost impossible. If Lynette left Brian, she did not simply leave a marriage. She left the only home she had. She left the retirement plan. She left years of shared investment in a life that had been constructed around 2 people, not 1. She mentioned needing to find a job at the post office to live on her own. She described feeling financially stronger with Brian than without him, not because he was providing for her, but because the entire structure of their shared life, including the boat as an asset, was entangled with their partnership in a way that made untangling it enormously difficult. She felt trapped. That is what the texts show, not the social media posts, not the videos with the smiling and the sea turtles and the cinnamon rolls, the private texts sent to a friend when the camera was off and the performance of the sailing life was set aside. Carly has also noted a specific financial asymmetry that she described when discussing the investigation. Lynette had a pension from AT&T. She had life insurance through her AT&T retirement benefits. Brian, Carly noted, did not have AT&T retirement. Whether a life insurance policy payable at Lynette's death exists, and in what amount, has not been confirmed in the public record. Investigators have not publicly addressed this element. But the asymmetry Carly describes, where Lynette's death would produce a financial asset that her continued existence and potential departure would not, is a documented variable in the relationship structure, and it is one that financial motive analysis in a criminal investigation would not overlook. This does not mean Brian Hooker killed his wife for life insurance. It means that the financial structure of their relationship is part of the picture that investigators are examining, alongside everything else. Motive, means, and opportunity are the framework. Financial asymmetry is one piece of motive analysis, not a conclusion. But it sits alongside the texts about feeling trapped, alongside the threat to throw her overboard, alongside the 9-hour gap, alongside the bruise photograph. And in combination, those elements form a picture that investigators are clearly taking very seriously. Let's talk about the bruise photograph, because it has been mentioned in the public record but not yet fully analyzed in coverage of this case. Carly Aylesworth mentioned in one of her public interviews that a friend of Lynette's in Jackson, Michigan holds a photograph. The photograph shows bruises on Lynette's back. According to Carly, the friend forwarded that photograph to the U.S. Coast Guard as part of the criminal investigation. The photograph exists. Its existence has been acknowledged. What it shows, specifically, has not been publicly described in any detail. Bruise pattern analysis is a recognized forensic discipline. The location, shape, age, and distribution of bruises can establish significant information, whether injuries are consistent with accidental contact, whether they are consistent with impacts from a specific type of object or force, whether they are consistent with self-infliction, and whether they are consistent with physical contact inflicted by another person. The pattern of bruising on a person's back, for example, can indicate a specific type of contact, falling against a hard surface, being gripped, being pushed, in ways that forensic analysis can sometimes distinguish. Whether that analysis has been applied to the photograph shared with the Coast Guard is not part of the public record, but the photograph was provided to investigators, which means it is now part of the evidentiary picture being built around this case. And in the context of a relationship where prior strangulation has been alleged and a specific death threat has been documented, that photograph carries potential evidentiary weight that deserves to be taken seriously. Now I want to walk through the 3 hypotheses that analysts and investigators have laid out for what might explain the 9-hour gap, because they deserve careful examination. Understanding what is possible and what the evidence has to show to make each hypothesis viable helps us understand what the investigation is working toward. The first hypothesis: Brian Hooker's account is essentially accurate, and the 9-hour duration reflects genuinely erratic and unpredictable conditions on the water that night. In 20-mile-per-hour winds, wind direction can shift. An unpowered dinghy does not travel in a straight line toward its destination. It travels in the direction the wind and current push it. If the wind on the Sea of Abaco on the night of April 4th was not consistently oriented toward Marsh Harbor, the dinghy could have spent hours moving in unproductive directions, covering ground that did not bring it closer to the destination, before finally finding a wind and current combination that carried it in. In this version, the 9 hours is the result of a non-linear path, significantly longer than the 4 to 6 mile direct distance, through genuinely difficult and variable conditions. What this hypothesis resolves: the duration. If the actual path traveled was dramatically longer than the direct route, if wind shifts push the dinghy away from shore repeatedly before eventually pushing it toward land, then 9 hours becomes potentially explainable. What this hypothesis struggles with: Carly confirmed the tidal current was 3 knots. In a 3-knot tidal current moving in a favorable direction, even an unpowered vessel caught in that current would be carried toward Marsh Harbor at a pace that makes the 9-hour duration difficult to account for. Meteorological and oceanographic data for the Abaco Sea on the night of April 4, 2026 can be reconstructed precisely. Wave height, wind speed, wind direction by hour, tidal flow. The Coast Guard almost certainly has that reconstruction as part of their investigation. It has not been made public. But if the wind that night was consistently oriented in a direction unfavorable to Marsh Harbor, this hypothesis gains strength. If it was variable or ultimately favorable, it weakens significantly. The second hypothesis: the dinghy was stationary for a significant period during those 9 hours. Time was spent at a specific location, anchored or stopped, before the final approach to shore. The time spent stationary accounts for the gap between expected transit time and the actual 9-hour duration. And what was happening during those stationary periods is not part of the account Brian gave to police. What this hypothesis resolves: the duration incompatibility. If the vessel was stopped for 4 to 6 hours during those 9 hours, then only 2 to 3 hours were spent in actual transit, which is entirely consistent with the physics. This version explains the numbers cleanly. What this hypothesis is complicated by: Carly's own description of the AIS data. She said she could see the trajectory, the vessel moving from Elbow Cay up the coast toward Marsh Harbor, but she specifically noted she could not account for what happened in the time between departure and the movement up the coast. If the AIS log showed clear, obvious stationary periods, a vessel anchored in one location for 4 hours, she would likely have described it that way. The fact that she described seeing a trajectory without clearly being able to read what happened in between suggests the log is more complex than a simple sequence of stopped then moved entries. But this interpretation has significant uncertainty, and the full log has not been described publicly. The third hypothesis: the account as given does not accurately describe the sequence of events during those 9 hours. The 9-hour gap contains events, actions, decisions, or locations that are not part of what Brian Hooker told police. The account is not a complete or accurate record of what happened between 7:30 p.m. and 4 a.m. What this hypothesis resolves: everything, all of the duration problems, all of the physics inconsistencies, the anchor not deployed, the kill switch mechanism that Lynette's daughter cannot explain, the trajectory that Carly could see on the AIS but could not account for temporally. In this version, the 9 hours contains something that the investigation has probable cause around, and that something is what drove the arrest on April 8th. What this hypothesis requires: evidence. But the evidence that could establish it exists. The AIS log is in the hands of the Coast Guard. The physical condition of the dinghy: was the anchor deployed or not? Were there signs of a struggle? What did forensic examination of the vessel reveal? Has been examined by investigators. Restaurant witnesses may have provided accounts of the couple's departure and their condition when they left. Communication logs from devices recovered from the vessel may exist. Whatever built the probable cause finding is drawn from the specific record of those 9 hours, and that record is accessible, documented, and under active forensic examination. Let's be precise about what has been established and what has not, because in an active investigation involving allegations against a person who has not been charged, that distinction matters. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He has denied any wrongdoing. His attorney has stated repeatedly that he has been cooperating with police, that he is heartbroken by his wife's disappearance, and that conclusions about foul play are premature without Lynette being found. The 2015 incident in Kentwood involves mutual allegations that were not resolved in court. The relationship's complexity, including both periods of documented conflict and visible warmth captured in their shared social media, does not reduce neatly to a single narrative. A former friend and fellow sailor, Blaine Stevenson, told CNN that he had dined with Brian and Lynette regularly and had no knowledge of difficulties in their relationship, describing them as a standard couple who talked about boating and normal life. He also expressed frustration, echoed by many in the sailing community, that the search for Lynette has received less public attention than the investigation into Brian, and that local boaters in the area were still learning about the disappearance days later, without any coordinated effort to engage them in the search. That frustration is worth acknowledging. Lynette Hooker has not been found. That is the central fact. The Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, and the U.S. Coast Guard all conducted extensive searches in the days following her disappearance, covering sea, shoreline, and aerial routes. After several days without results, the operation officially shifted from rescue to recovery. The water has given nothing back. If Lynette entered the water alive and swimming toward shore, as Brian's account describes, in conditions that were challenging but not catastrophic, in an area surrounded by islands, harbors, and shorelines populated with boats and residents and rescue services, the question of why she has not been found on a beach or shoreline is one that the investigation must ultimately address. That absence is itself a data point that investigators weigh against the account of where she entered the water. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, told the Associated Press that the family is in shock. She said she was glad to hear of Brian's arrest, but that the family still has many unanswered questions. She said they are still holding on for a positive outcome. Lynette's daughter Carly has been the most public voice in this case, and she has made clear what she wants. Not vengeance, not certainty before the facts are in. What she wants is truth. "I don't want anything bad to happen to him," she said of Brian. "I just hope this was a freak accident, but I don't want it to just be swept under the rug." She also said something that lingers. "Part of me still hopes that she's just on the opposite side of the island somewhere, taking a break from life. But I feel like by now someone would have noticed her and reported her." Let's return to the timestamps one final time, because they are the spine of this case, and placing them clearly in your mind is the most important thing we can do as we close. 7:30 p.m. Brian and Lynette leave the restaurant at Elbow Cay. Sometime between 7:30 p.m. and 4 a.m., Lynette goes overboard, according to Brian's account. The engine stops. He sees her swimming toward shore. He loses sight of her. 4 a.m. Brian arrives at the Marsh Harbor Boatyard. 5:12 a.m. Emergency services are notified, more than 9.5 hours after the alleged accident. The direct distance from Elbow Cay to Marsh Harbor, 4 to 6 nautical miles. The confirmed maximum speed of the electric motor, 2 to 3 knots. Expected transit time under power, 2 to 3 hours. Expected drift time with a 3-knot favorable tidal current, 90 minutes to 2 hours. The 9-hour duration requires one of 3 things: a path dramatically longer than the direct route, conditions dramatically worse than what Carly described, or time spent somewhere doing something not in the account. The AIS system recorded the vessel's position throughout those 9 hours. The Coast Guard has that data. 2 hours of interview were spent with Carly at a Coast Guard facility in Detroit specifically because of what that data may reveal. The probable cause for Brian Hooker's arrest was built at least in part on whatever investigators found when they examined the full record of those 9 hours and compared it to the account given. Before we close, I want to spend a moment on the questions that are not yet in the public record. The things that the investigation will need to establish if this case is to move from an arrest on probable cause to formal charges, and eventually, answers for Lynette's family. The first question: what does the full AIS log show? Carly Aylesworth described seeing the vessel at Elbow Cay in the evening and then moving up the coast later. She saw the trajectory. She could not account for what happened in the time between. The full AIS log, with entries at regular intervals throughout those 9 hours, either shows continuous movement, stationary periods, or both. If it shows stationary periods, the investigation will need to explain what the vessel was doing during those periods and why that information is not in the account. If it shows continuous movement, the investigation will need to reconcile that movement pattern with both the departure location, the arrival location, and the 9-hour duration. Either way, the log is telling a story. The question is whether that story matches the one Brian told police. The second question, what did the physical examination of the dinghy reveal? The dinghy eventually washed ashore near Marsh Harbor. Investigators had access to it. A physical examination of an 8-foot vessel can reveal significant information. The condition of the anchor and anchor line, whether there are signs of a struggle, what forensic traces are present on the hull and interior, whether the kill switch device shows wear patterns consistent with being grabbed during a fall or something else entirely. What forensic examination of that vessel produced has not been made public, but it was examined, and it is part of what led investigators to probable cause. The third question, what did restaurant witnesses say? Brian and Lynette spent part of the evening of April 4th at a restaurant in Hopetown. There were other people there, staff, other patrons. People who may have observed the couple's demeanor that evening may have heard something, may have noticed what time they left and what their condition was. The question of whether alcohol was consumed that evening, a documented variable in the relationship's conflict history, has not been confirmed in the public record. But investigators would have spoken to people at that restaurant as one of their first steps in reconstructing the evening. Whatever those witnesses described has not been publicly released. The fourth question, what do the devices show? Brian Hooker had AIS access on his phone. Both he and Lynette carried phones and other devices. In any investigation involving a disappearance at sea, communication records, calls made, messages sent, applications accessed, location data logged by the device are examined carefully. Whether Brian attempted to contact anyone during those 9 hours, whether any communications were sent or received during the gap, whether device location data is consistent with or inconsistent with the account given, all of these are questions that digital forensics can answer. What those records show has not been made public. The fifth question, where is Lynette Hooker? This is the question that sits underneath all of the others. An intensive search by multiple agencies across sea, shoreline, and air found nothing. In the days following the disappearance, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. If Lynette entered the water alive and swimming toward shore in conditions described as challenging but not catastrophic, in an area not far from populated islands and active harbor communities, the absence of any trace of her is a finding that the investigation must account for. Either she entered the water at a location different from where the account places her, or conditions were more extreme than described, or there is something else about the circumstances of her disappearance that explains why she has not been found where she should have been found. The Bahamas proceedings and the U.S. Coast Guard investigation are running on parallel tracks. The Bahamas authorities have jurisdiction over what happened in their waters. The U.S. Coast Guard has opened a federal criminal investigation reflecting the serious attention American law enforcement is giving to the disappearance of an American citizen abroad. 2 jurisdictions, 2 investigative bodies, the same set of questions, and a shared record that includes AIS data, forensic evidence, witness accounts, and the documented history of a relationship that, in private moments, looked very different from the life captured on camera. Brian Hooker's attorney has maintained throughout this process that her client is cooperating, that he is heartbroken, and that the public narrative has outpaced the evidence. That is a legitimate legal position, and it is one that the presumption of innocence requires us to hold space for. People have been wrongly suspected in disappearance cases before. Circumstances that look damning from the outside can resolve into tragedy without criminality. The math of the 9-hour gap may have an explanation that has not yet surfaced publicly. All of these possibilities exist. But the investigators working this case have access to the full record. They have the AIS data, the physical evidence, the witness statements, the forensic findings, the communication logs. They have everything that has been described publicly, and they have things that have not been described at all. And based on that full record, they arrested Brian Hooker on probable cause and have been building a case ever since. What that case eventually produces, charges or no charges, an explanation or continued silence, Lynette found, or the ocean keeping it secret, we do not yet know. Lynette Hooker was a woman who built a life out of choosing the thing that scared other people. She chose the open ocean when everyone else stayed on land. She chose the unpredictability of weather and water and wind when she could have chosen the safety of a schedule and a mortgage. She documented her life not because she wanted to be famous, but because she was genuinely, visibly happy living it, and she wanted the people she loved to see it. Her last post before she disappeared shows boats anchored in calm, clear water. The caption she wrote reads, "Not going anywhere for a while." She could not have known what those words would mean a few days later. Her daughter is still looking, her mother is still waiting. And somewhere in the evidentiary record being assembled by 2 criminal investigations, one in the Bahamas and one in the United States, there are answers to what happened to her. If you have any information related to Lynette Hooker's disappearance, please contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force at the Marsh Harbor Police Station or the U.S. Coast Guard Detroit Sector, which is conducting its own active federal criminal investigation into this case. If this investigation moved you, if you think Lynette's story matters and deserves to be heard, please subscribe to True Crime Vault right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone. Every view, every share, every subscriber helps this story reach people who may have information, who may be following the case, who may be part of bringing answers to Lynette's family. Drop your theory in the comments. Does the 9-hour gap tell us what happened on the water that night? Does the AIS data hold the answer? Does the prior threat change how you read the account? I read every comment, and this conversation is one worth having. These are not just stories. These are real people, real families, real questions that have not yet been answered. Lynette Hooker was living the life she had chosen, sailing with her husband in the Bahamas in early April when the ocean became, in some way that is still being investigated, the last place she was ever seen. She deserves to be found. She deserves answers. And she deserves to be remembered as more than a disappearance, as the woman who loved the water, who cooked cinnamon rolls on a solar oven, who pointed at her shirt that said "growing old" disgracefully and laughed, who filmed sea turtles and called the ocean her happy place and chose, every single day, to live wide open. We are going to keep following this case, and when the answers come, we will be here. True Crime Vault, unlocking the cases that deserve to be remembered.